How can the country come together if we can't even agree across the political aisle about the institutions that form the foundation of a civil society? I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. Men, the Pew Research Center has a new survey out, and it basically outlines what Republicans and Republican leaners, as well as Democrats and Democrat leaners, believe about the major institutions in this country, including churches and religious organizations, banks and financial institutions, labor unions, the national news media, and there's one other important one. Oh, universities and colleges. So, for example, to give you just a taste of the data here, 72% of Democrats and independents who lean Democrats say universities have a positive effect on the country. But 58% of Republicans and their ilk say that colleges have a negative effect on the country. Now, Democrats are actually split on the national news media, believe it or not, but 85% of Republicans view the news media negatively. And finally, 73% of Republicans see churches and religious organizations as a net positive for the country, while only 50% of Democrats do, and 36% of Democrats think religious organizations are hurting us. So, Stephen Green, if we're so divided on the value of the fundamental forces that exert influence over large numbers of people in this country, how can a Congress that is supposed to represent the people even make legislation regarding everything from free speech to banking and labor unions to education, funding, or religious liberty?
We've got a GOP majority Congress that can't even repeal Obamacare after pledging in 2010, 2012, 2014, and 2016 to do just that. And the thing is, Congress does reflect the will of the people. It's supposed to. What happened is we had a breakdown, really, in 2010, where the Democrats got a supermajority and they pushed all this stuff through, and they broke a lot of things. But since the Senate is where bad legislation and even good legislation is supposed to go to die, we can't undo any of this mess. And this is a reflection of the state of the American people. Look, it's our public institutions. They are so broken. They are. I don't even know where to begin to describe the problem. It's so immense. The way the country is structured, the way the Constitution is structured, I should say, is the Bill of Rights simply removes certain things from the sphere of politics. There's a line here that says, you shall not pass when it comes to legislating free speech, when it comes to taking guns away, when it comes to quartering of troops, although that hasn't been a problem in a while. But there are certain things removed from the public sphere. The problem is, we have a government that's still supposed to be structured that way, but we have all of these violations, and those violations corrupt the very things they were supposed to be helping, whether it was the university or the media, or any of these things that are now cross-pollinated with this huge leviathan in Washington that was never supposed to have been corrupted by it. So when we look at this distrust of our institutions, it doesn't matter if it's a righty distrust of lefty institutions or lefty distrust of right-wing institutions. The fact is that government has corrupted almost everything it touches, and it's up to us to clean up the muck, and we just can't do it.
Well, you know, if there's any good news in this Pew Research study, it's that if you lump us all together across party lines, so forget the divisions for a second, if you take everybody together, the institutions viewed most positively overall are churches and religious groups, 59% positive, and most negatively overall, the news media, 63% overall. View it negatively. Now, Bill Whittle, if you are anything from a bank or union leader to a college dean to a CNN executive producer to a pastor, you've got a problem on your hands. How do you convince a third to two-thirds of the country that you're not part of the problem but part of the solution?
Well, in the case of the news media and universities, they are not only part of the problem, they're the spear carriers for the problem. They're the vanguard of the problem. They're the hardcore cadre, the van of the problem. Strikes me that the way those data points break out is it kind of shows you who people perceive their social enemies to be. I mean, in terms of their big social enemies, right? Undoubtedly, a progressive would hear what you said about the university and say, see, those Republicans, 58% of them are against education. They just want to keep people poor and stupid so they can make more money off of them. And Republicans would say, no, we're in favor of education, which is why we're so opposed to the American university system, which has not been about education for quite a long time. It's about indoctrination. You don't know the difference between the two, and so therefore you support them. Likewise, progressives don't see any bias in the news media. Why would they see any bias? It tells them exactly everything they want to hear and codes everything that they don't want to hear in such a way that it's not only alien, but it's alien in a small minority of far-right extremists who essentially want to, see brown people starving in the streets so that they can, take their bodies and desiccate them in order to get the oil or something like that. You get the general idea. So, so it's a question of whose ox is being gored. It's interesting to me that the one thing that progressives find most negative in the society is not the news media, which we think is corrupt. It's not the universities, which are indoctrination centers. It's religious institutions. And that's also kind of makes a certain kind of sense, right? Because religious institutions prevent liberals and progressives from doing everything they want all the time without there being at least moral consequences to it. They don't want to hear that. But I think ultimately Steve is right. The problem is not even so much government, Steve. I think so much that politics has invaded every part of our lives. Government used to be something that happened in Washington, and you didn't get all lathered up about what the percentage on this trade tariff was going to be, or it really didn't matter all that much. Now politics tells you what to eat, what to drive, how hot your house can be. They tell you where you can go, what you can do, what you're not allowed to do. They tell you everything about everything. They tell you where your kids have to go to school. They tell you they can't go to school someplace else. They tell you what they're going to put into those children's head. They tell you if you don't like it, then you're going to go to jail. And they take all your money and so on. So as politics gets more and more into life, of course we become more and more divided as a country, because everything now is politics, everything. And even things like Colin Kaepernick take politics into something that used to be free of politics. You used to be able to say, okay, we're Republicans, they're Democrats. You could sit there and watch a Florida State game, and you could root for the good guys or you could root for the Seminoles, up to you. But it didn't matter. But at least you could be together there. But even now, that's not allowed, right? Colin Kaepernick's going to, and people like that are going to bring politics into sports. And ESPN is suffering because they're bringing politics into sports. They're bringing politics into everything. And the reason for this is because the progressives are a bunch of communist savages who simply have to control other people's lives.
Hey, Bill, Bill, let me add on to what you said, because what you were saying made me realize that I was wrong when I said we can't fight back. We are fighting back. Just it's not a frontal assault. These old line institutions that the progressives control, especially the media and the universities, are dying on the vine. The news media is being replaced by Twitter and places like BillWhittle.com. That's right. Yeah. And the universities have just inflated themselves out of affordability, and they're going to be replaced by online learning and for-profit learning. And so we're coming at them sideways, but we're coming at them.
That's right.
And that's one more thing I would add that is some good news, and that is I just finished a week ago an interview with Dave Rubin. I don't know if you know who he is. He's a guy who considers himself a liberal. He's very much against the progressives and so on. And, Dave is openly gay, married to a man, and Dave and I had a really great in-depth discussion. And we came to realize that we could probably put together a political platform that 85 to 90% of America could get behind. Because we'd make it about solutions, and we would take politics out of things that don't need politics in them, and we would reduce politics to its smallest possible level. So he considers himself a devout liberal, but he's for small government and limited government, which in my mind kind of makes him a conservative.
Now, classical liberal is what we
May
call
I just add to Stephen Green's comment, if right angle here is not a frontal assault, it's at least prefrontal. Perhaps more disturbing in this study than the divide is the direction. It was just 2 years ago, about 54% of Republicans viewed universities positively. Now it's just 36%. And the opinions, whether they're positive or negative, on most institutions get stronger as you get to the ideological extremes over time. For example, liberal Democrats are much more likely to see the news media as a force for good today than they were 2 years ago. Perhaps hidden is there's another little nugget of good news hidden in this Pew Research Center survey, and that's the indication that 2 out of 3 Democrats who have postgraduate degrees, these are the leftist elites, see labor unions as a good thing for the country. But among those most likely to join a union, those with little more than a high school diploma, only about half of those folks view labor unions positively. So that seems to me to be an upbeat note. And one more interesting thing. The place where we're most likely to come together, about 75% of Republicans and Democrats combined view churches as a force for good when the respondents share one characteristic in common: when they actually attend church on a weekly basis. In other words, those most likely to see churches as a positive good in society, no matter their politics, are those who actually have experienced the product. They're the ones who give it the highest ratings. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.